Hi, I'm Charlie Travis, and my presentation today is going to be on the topic of historical GIS, study of the American Civil War, where I discuss and try to illustrate how geography and history are really in symbiosis. Geography is not merely a setting upon which history is enacted, but is enmeshed and shapes history as much as history or human agency shapes the natural environments around us. And it's also going to highlight how historical GIS can help us see this relationship. The subject is based upon a chapter in my book, Environment as a Weapon. Chapter 7, Industrial War of Organic Beings in the American Caesura, 1860-1865, where I sort of argue that the environment manifested as a significant player and participant in the U.S. Civil War. And I do this through the lens of Emily Dickinson's poetry. Emily Dickinson produced 1,500 poems over the course of the U.S. Civil War, most of them focusing on this relationship between human beings and their environments, sort of a very perceptive. And so I use methods I've developed in literary geography, literary GIS, to try to tease apart these type of relationships between humans and their environments and how this occurred during the American Civil War. There are 4 examples of the complex organic industrial assemblages between humans, technologies, and the physical geography of the Civil War. The first was the Anaconda blockade, which the Union imposed upon the South, so the South could not transport its cotton to England and sell it and gain money for its war efforts. Sherman's march to the sea, where he burned down the plantation system, largely in Georgia. The Battle of the Wilderness and the Overland Campaign, where the raging inferno of a forest fire became a significant factor in the conduct of that battle. And lastly, the Battle of the Crater at the Siege of Petersburg, where Pennsylvania coal miners dug a mine under a Confederate redoubt and exploded it. Ironically, it created a crater in which Union soldiers became entrapped, and it became a Confederate victory. But it was an example of, these are 4 examples of how environment was used as a weapon during the U.S. Civil War. So we can see the Civil War was a duel between 2 social and biological entities, as Matthew Fiege points out. This was a struggle not simply between 2 economies, but between 2 ecologies, an organic struggle in which 2 societies fought to use and overcome nature in the service of competing objectives. So we had an industrial north, an agrarian south, and I wanted to tease apart this using historical GIS. So the opening of anthracite coalfields in Pennsylvania across the Appalachian Range in the 1830s provided factories that were developing largely in the north with an inexpensive fuel that burned at high temperatures for superior metallurgy. And by 1840s, the amount of anthracite and bituminous fossils burning in thousands of American furnaces, forges, and factories prompted the period journals to declare that the United States had entered the coal age. In much American historiography, there's been an emphasis on agrarian frontier and settlement models, most famously exemplified by Frederick Jackson Turner's frontier thesis. But this overshadowed the presence and growth of a manufacturing frontier that was marked by the processes, impacts, consumptions, conflicts, and cultural imprints of geological resources extractions. And the organic and industrial assemblies that developed between the emerging industrial revolution and the raw natural resources of the North American continent. And census records really didn't start taking account of this until really the 1880s, 1890s. And by 1900, based upon the 1900 census, you can map out what a speculated manufacturing frontier. So, on the eve of the Civil War, the United States' growing industrial base was extracting and burning fossil fuels at an unprecedented rate in human history. In the war, fostered large corporate investments in bituminous mining, rendering the softer, sooty coal the dominant fuel of the second wave of the American Industrial Revolution. And so, invoking the lens of Emily Dickinson's poetry, the first sort of explicit description was the Battle of Antietam, which arguably has been the battle in America with the most casualties within the period in which the battle was fought. And her poem 656 describes this sort of atmospheric environmental ambience of the battle. Her poetry conveys poetic insight into the Civil War as an ecological catastrophe that entangled human bodies with the environment on savage, intimate, and microscopic scales. So images of arteries upon the hills, bodies of stone, shower of stain, the scarlet rain, talks about the havoc and destruction wrecked by the battle, So what I did with the GIS is I did basically, what GIS is designed to do, which allows you to take mapping layers and superimpose different layers on a base map and mix and match these different layers to look at spatial relationships and connections. So this first map image is of the coal deposits in the United States. And as you can see, collectively, the South probably has larger deposits than the Northeast did. Of course, the difference was that the North utilized what it had, while the South belatedly did, but only with deposits around Virginia. They never really tapped into this because their economy was set up to be an agricultural economy. The next layer of the map is that I can superimpose the sites of battles that were fought during the Civil War. So this is a map of the battles won. The ones that are in white were inconclusive. The battles in blue were won by the Union, and the battles in red were won by the Confederacy. So what we're doing is we're placing battles over a layer of where the coal fields are, and we can see that there's a preponderance, particularly here in the north. Then, of course, the function of the railroad during the Civil War. Railroads grew at an exponential rate, particularly in the north, and became the mode of transporting not only personnel, but mortars, armaments, everything else. And so this is another layer of this organic industrial assemblage that we see growing. And then we see canals and steamboats integrated into this sort of organic industrial nervous system, along with telegraphs, which allowed the communication of battlefield results and perhaps strategies. Abraham Lincoln and Edward Stanton went to the telegraph office to monitor the war, probably the first telecommunications monitoring of a conflict in world history. And then, of course, the South and its slaveocracy. And this is a map from the 1860 census, which illustrates the regions in the South with the highest levels of slavery. And so the darker the image, the more slaves. And so we can see along the Mississippi lower Mississippi, a high concentration, as well as in lower South Carolina. And we can see that even though with this huge sort of coal deposit, that the South, of course, is dealing with a completely different agricultural economy, not one based upon extraction, although they did develop an industrial base after the war started at a fast rate, but it was not big enough to match the North. And so what we see here is all these layers. There's been a study that shows, particularly on the lower Mississippi, that the petrochemical domination of the region resembles that of the plantation regime of the Old South. And Emily Dickinson's poetry catches up on the ethnic racial dimension of this war, color, caste, denomination. These are times affair. But what's interesting to me, not that this isn't interesting to me, is this idea of what we can do with GIS technology today, particularly. So Esri has rolled out these new geo apps, and one of these is a dashboard where you can put all your layers together in a dynamic presentation that's interactive. And as you can see, all the different layers I was speaking about are loading. And the great thing about these dashboards is as you navigate through them, the charts that you've set up keep track of the regions and the type of variables that you're measuring. So in this map, we have the organic industrial assemblage densities where they were most dense during the war. We can see up here, pretty dense region. And then we have the layers of coal fields, major rivers, major lakes, Civil War canals, Civil War steamboats, Civil War rails, Civil War battles, and the number of enslaved in 1860, and then Civil War states and the capitals. And I think what this does is allows us to collate, put together a lot of data, and use it as a sort of a drawing board or a speculative space to look at relationships between environment and human agency. And this is framed, of course, within the narrative of the U.S. Civil War. But these sort of maps can also help enhance the prospect of public histories by creating these sort of interfaces where people can go in and just play around with the data and the visualizations. So that is about all I really have to say today. This map is posted on my staff page at the University of Texas, Arlington. And of course, you can email me at charles.travis@uta.edu if you have any questions. And I thank you for attending this session. And again, thank Pauline, Robert, and Charlie for participating. Have a great day.